They had never seen anything like it. A female Brahman bull, one of the most powerful domestic animals in Texas, was being surrounded by something deadly, not even native to the region. A massive swarm of killer bees engulfing her with lethal intent. Rangers rushed to help, but what left everyone speechless wasn't just the horrific scene they found. It was what the male Brahmin did next, because in that moment, on a dusty road far from any safe pasture, instinct turned into something else, something we don't often talk about in the animal kingdom: loyalty, courage, and a kind of love that doesn't need words. Sometimes, Old Man Jenkins would later say, his weathered face solemn in the golden Texas sunset, the deadliest storms don't come from the sky, and sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear badges. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on Ranger Mike Callahan's pickup as it kicked up dust along the back roads of Redemption Springs. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, jaw clenched tight as the dispatcher's words echoed in his mind. Massive bee attack. Brahmin cattle. Jenkins's South Pasture. 23 years as a Texas wildlife ranger, and he'd never heard of killer bees targeting cattle with such aggression. Mike's truck skidded to a halt at the edge of a sprawling pasture. What he saw made his chest tighten. There, in the center of the golden grass, stood a massive bull. Easily 2,000 pounds of rippling muscle beneath a distinctive silver-gray hide. But it wasn't the bull that made Mike's breath catch. It was what surrounded the smaller figure beside him. The female Brahmin lay on her side, her white coat nearly invisible beneath a writhing black mass. Thousands of bees, African killer bees from the look of them, swarmed over her in pulsing waves. Her legs kicked weakly, each movement becoming more feeble than the last. "Sweet Jesus," Mike whispered, grabbing his protective gear from behind the seat. The male bull, Thunder, according to Old Man Jenkins's frantic call, was doing something Mike had never witnessed in his decades working with wildlife. Instead of fleeing the attack, the bull was standing over the female, using his massive head to sweep at the swarm. Each sweep of his horns cleared momentarily before the angry cloud regrouped. More shocking still, the bull appeared to be deliberately placing his own body between the worst of the swarm and the fallen female. "He's protecting her," came a voice behind Mike. "Doctor." Sarah Bennett had arrived in her veterinary truck, already pulling on her protective suit. Her eyes were wide behind her glasses. "I've never seen defensive behavior like this between cattle." "How long does she have?" Mike asked, voice tight as he yanked on his own bee suit. Sarah's face was grim beneath her protective hood. "Those are Africanized bees. With that many stings, the venom will reach critical levels in her system within hours. Without specialized antivenom, she won't survive past tomorrow morning." 24 hours, Mike muttered, feeling the weight of the clock already bearing down. As if understanding their words, Thunder let out a bellow that seemed to split the very air, a sound of such primal anguish that both humans froze. The bull's eyes, normally placid, burned with what Mike could only describe as determination as he continued to shield the female, Daisy, Jenkins had called her, from the relentless swarm. "That's not just herd protection," Sarah whispered. "That's something else entirely." Mike nodded, grabbing the specialized foam spray that would neutralize the bees. "Well, whatever it is, we've got less than a day to save her. Let's move." Mike Callahan remembered the first time he'd laid eyes on Thunder 2 years ago. That August had been cruel, the kind of relentless Texas summer that curled the edges of the earth and pushed even the hardiest creatures to the brink. The call had come in just after noon. Abandoned property, animals in distress, possible abuse situation. Standard procedure would have been to forward it to animal control, but something in the caller's voice had pulled Mike to the scene himself. The abandoned rodeo ranch had sat baking in the drought, a collection of weathered buildings and rusted metal pens that shimmered in the heat. Even before he'd stepped from his truck, Mike had smelled the distinct sour odor of neglect, a scent that had followed him through too many cases across his career. "Property belongs to Roy Wilkins," Sheriff Tom Denton had explained, squinting against the sun. "Word is his rodeo business went belly up after the charges. Animal cruelty, illegal gambling, doping his bulls to make 'em more aggressive. Skipped town 3 days ago when the bank came to foreclose." Mike had felt something old and familiar stir in his gut as they'd approached the largest pen. He'd known what neglected animals looked like. He'd seen plenty in his time as a ranger, and if he was being honest with himself, in his time before that too. But what they found in that pen still haunted his dreams. The Brahman bull had been magnificent once, even emaciated, ribs pressing against dull silver-gray hide. The creature stood nearly 6 feet at the shoulder. But it wasn't the bull's size that had stopped Mike cold. It was the scars, dozens of them, crisscrossing the animal's back and flanks. Some were old, white lines against the dark hide. Others were fresh, still weeping in the heat. "Jesus Christ," Sheriff Denton had muttered. "What'd they do to him?" The bull had raised his massive head, eyes finding Mike's. There had been no fear there, no panic, just a quiet, burning intelligence that seemed to take Mike's measure. Later, Mike would tell Dr. Bennett that in that moment he'd felt judged by those eyes and found wanting. "Electric prods," Mike had said, recognizing the distinctive pattern of burns. "See those circular marks? And those longer cuts are from spurs. Bull riders use 'em when the animal's not performing well enough." The words had tasted bitter in his mouth. He'd known, because there had been a time, a different life ago, when he'd worked the other side of this equation. When Mike Callahan hadn't worn a ranger's badge, but had instead been the man ranchers called when they needed animals dealt with or exotic specimens procured without questions. He'd never been proud of those years, but they'd left him with knowledge that sometimes proved useful in his redemption work. The bull had watched them approach, neither retreating nor charging. Something in the animal's demeanor had struck Mike as unusual. Most rodeo bulls, especially abused ones, responded with either aggression or fear. This one simply observed, his gaze unnervingly steady. "He needs water," Mike had said, already moving toward his truck for the portable trough he carried. "And a vet, those wounds are infected." What had followed was 3 days of what Dr. Sarah Bennett called the most stubborn standoff I've ever seen between man and bull. The animal, whom they'd started calling Thunder after the low, rumbling sounds he made when they approached, had refused to let anyone near him. He'd accepted water, drunk deeply when they left the trough, but any attempt to treat his wounds had been met with warning charges that stopped precisely at the fence line. On the 4th day, Mike had made a decision that Sheriff Denton called the dumbest thing I've ever seen you do, and that's saying something. He'd entered the pen alone, unarmed except for a bucket of feed and antiseptic spray. "You remember the right way, don't you?" Thunder had seemed to ask with those steady eyes. "You remember how to approach without the chains and prods?" And Mike had some muscle memory from his grandfather's ranch, from before everything had gone wrong in his life, had guided him slow, deliberate movements, eyes averted but body language open, no sudden gestures, respect in every step. It had taken 3 hours of silent communion in that pen before Thunder had allowed Mike near enough to begin treating the worst of the wounds. By sunset, the massive bull had been eating cautiously from Mike's hand. "Never seen anything like it," Old Man Jenkins had commented when he'd come by to help transport Thunder to the sanctuary. "That bull knows you, son. Or at least he knows your kind." Mike had chosen not to explain how right Jenkins might be, that in another life, Mike might have been among those who'd put those scars on Thunder's hide. Some redemptions were too complicated to voice aloud. The Redemption Springs Wildlife Sanctuary hadn't been equipped for a bull of Thunder's size, but Sarah had made accommodations, converting a former horse paddock into a spacious enclosure with shade and a small pond. For weeks, Thunder had remained aloof, accepting treatment but keeping his distance from the humans who tended to him. Everything had changed the day Daisy arrived. The female Brahmin had been seized from the same owner, found at another property, a much younger animal, barely 5 years old to Thunder's 12. Unlike Thunder, her silver-white coat bore few scars, but her ribs showed clearly against her hide, and she moved with the hesitant gait of an animal expecting punishment. Mike had been helping Sarah unload Daisy from the trailer when Thunder's behavior had shifted dramatically. The bull, normally content to watch activities from the far side of his enclosure, had approached the fence, his massive head lowered not in aggression, but in what looked remarkably like concern. Daisy's reaction had been even more startling. Upon seeing Thunder, she'd let out a soft lowing sound and pulled toward his enclosure with such determination that Sarah had nearly lost her grip on the lead rope. "Careful," Mike had warned. "We don't know how they'll interact. Bulls can be territorial." But Sarah's face had shown something beyond professional interest. "Look at their eyes," she'd said quietly. "They know each other." Against protocol, but following instinct, they'd allowed Daisy into Thunder's paddock under careful supervision. What followed had defied conventional understanding of bovine behavior. Thunder had approached slowly, circling Daisy with what could only be described as gentleness. The female had stood trembling until Thunder had lowered his massive head and nuzzled against her neck. The tension had visibly drained from Daisy's body. "Family," Old Man Jenkins had declared when he witnessed their interaction days later. "Not mates. Look at the age difference and her behavior. She's too young, and that's not courtship, my guess. That's his calf." Sarah had been skeptical. "The chances of two related Brahmins ending up at the same sanctuary after separate rescues ain't about chances," Jenkins had interrupted with the certainty of his 78 years. "It's about knowing animals. That bull's protecting his daughter." DNA tests were expensive and rarely used for rescued livestock, so the theory had remained just that, a theory. But as the months passed, the bond between Thunder and Daisy had only deepened. The once aggressive bull had become gentler, allowing handlers near when Daisy was present. For her part, Daisy had flourished under Thunder's watchful eye, gaining weight and eventually displaying the playfulness typical of younger cattle. He saved her twice, Mike had told Sarah one evening as they watched the pair grazing together in the sunset. Once from that ranch and once from her fear. Sarah's eyes had held shadows of her own pain. "Some wounds don't show on the outside," she'd said quietly. Mike had known she wasn't just talking about the bulls. They'd all been healing at Redemption Springs, the animals and their caretakers alike. Until this morning, when the clock had suddenly started ticking on everything they'd built. 20 hours remained on Dr. Sarah Bennett's mental countdown as she worked methodically in the sanctuary's makeshift treatment center. What had once been a horse stable now served as their emergency medical facility, hastily converted to accommodate Daisy's massive frame. The female Brahmin lay on her side on a bed of clean straw, her breathing labored, each exhale carrying a faint wheezing sound that made Sarah's stomach tighten. "How many stings?" Mike asked, his voice low as he handed Sarah another syringe of epinephrine. "I stopped counting after 200, Sarah replied, not looking up from her work. "Africanized bees deliver less venom per sting than regular honeybees, but with this many," she shook her head. "The toxicity is overwhelming her system. Multiple organ systems are already showing signs of stress." The bull's normally white coat was marred by angry red welts, each one a testament to the ferocity of the attack. Despite the sedative Sarah had administered, Daisy's muscles occasionally twitched, her body fighting both the venom and the treatment. From outside the treatment area came a low, rumbling bellow. Thunder, pacing the perimeter of the small paddock where they'd temporarily contained him. The sound had been nearly constant since they'd separated him from Daisy. "He hasn't stopped calling for her," Emily Whitaker whispered. The 12-year-old sat on an overturned bucket in the corner, her eyes wide behind thick glasses. Emily volunteered at the sanctuary on weekends, her special connection with the animals making her an unofficial mascot. Though diagnosed with severe autism that limited her verbal communication, Emily seemed to understand the animals in ways that sometimes surpassed even the professionals. Mike nodded. He knows she's in trouble. Sarah pressed her stethoscope to Daisy's chest, her expression grim. Cardiac arrhythmia. The venom is affecting her heart. She glanced at her watch. We need specialized anti-venom, not just supportive care. With this level of envenomation, standard treatments won't be enough. The university in Austin might have some, Mike suggested, already pulling out his phone. Might not be bees at all, came a gravelly voice from the doorway. Old Man Jenkins stood there, his weathered face set in a frown beneath his ever-present cowboy hat. Though he'd sold his ranch years ago, Jenkins remained a fixture at the sanctuary, offering generations of cattle-raising wisdom that sometimes proved more valuable than veterinary textbooks. Sarah raised an eyebrow. I've treated enough bee stings to recognize— Oh, they're bee stings, all right, Jenkins interrupted, stepping fully into the treatment area. But those ain't natural bees, not by a long shot. He nodded toward Daisy. Natural bees, even them African killers, don't cause that kind of reaction. And they sure don't target cattle specifically. Mike exchanged a glance with Sarah. Jenkins was known for his occasional conspiracy theories, a trait the older ranchers in the area seemed to develop alongside their practical wisdom. What are you suggesting, Jenkins? Mike asked carefully. The old man's eyes narrowed. Government's been messing with them bees for years. Military applications. Weather control. Been hearing about it from my cousin in New Mexico. They got a facility not 30 miles from here. Sarah couldn't quite suppress her eye roll. With all due respect, Mr. Jenkins, I think we need to focus on scientific solutions right now. Not, you call the university, Jenkins continued undeterred. They'll give you the runaround. That antivenom you need ain't in no regular hospital. He tapped his cane emphatically on the floor. Mark my words. As if punctuating Jenkins' statement, thunder let out another bellow from outside, this one ending in a sound almost like a human moan. The noise silenced everyone in the room. We need to let him see her, Emily said suddenly, her voice soft but clear, a rarity that always commanded attention. Sarah shook her head firmly. Absolutely not. Daisy is in critical condition. The last thing she needs is a 1,000-pound bull in her treatment space, no matter how well-intentioned. He's suffering too, Jenkins pointed out. Animals can die of heartbreak same as people. Mike moved to the window watching thunder pace. The massive bull had refused food since they'd arrived at the sanctuary, his focus entirely on the building where they'd taken Daisy. Even now, his massive head remained oriented toward the treatment center, as if he could see through the walls to the ailing female within. Sarah, Mike said quietly, what if Jenkins is right? Not about the government bees, he added quickly when she shot him an exasperated look, but about thunder. I've never seen behavior like this in cattle before. If we keep them separated and something happens to Daisy, and if we let him in and he panics, Sarah countered, he could injure her further or damage our equipment. Bulls are unpredictable when stressed. Not this one, Emily said with the certainty only children can muster. He understands. The debate was interrupted by the arrival of Tom Denton, now Redemption Springs sheriff. His expression was grim as he stepped into the treatment area, removing his hat. "Got reports of similar attacks on livestock at 3 other ranches," he announced without preamble. "All within a 10-mile radius, all within the last 48 hours. States sending in specialists." "Any fatalities?" Sarah asked, already preparing another IV bag. Tom nodded solemnly. "2 horses at the Peterson place. 1 cow at Wilcox's." He glanced at Daisy. "How's she doing?" "Critical but stable," Sarah replied. "We've got maybe 20 hours before the venom causes irreversible damage. We need specialized anti-venom." "That's the other reason I'm here," Tom said, his gaze shifting to Mike. "State wants to coordinate with all local agencies. There's talk of evacuating some of the smaller farms if this spreads. They're setting up a command center at the high school." He hesitated. "They're also talking about euthanizing severely affected animals to prevent suffering." Mike's jaw tightened. "Daisy's not being euthanized." "Nobody's making that call yet," Tom assured him. "But you know how these things go. State comes in, starts throwing their weight around." He let the implication hang in the air. Outside, Thunder's bellowing had stopped. The sudden silence was somehow more unnerving than the noise had been. Mike moved to the window again and saw the bull standing perfectly still, his massive head raised as if listening. "Something's changed," Mike said quietly. Sarah joined him at the window, her scientific skepticism momentarily suspended as she observed Thunder's behavior. "It's almost like he understood what Sheriff Denton said." "Told you," Emily whispered. "He knows." The stillness was broken by a sudden beeping from the monitoring equipment attached to Daisy. Sarah rushed back to her patient, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "Blood pressure dropping," she announced, reaching for medication. "Heart rate elevated. She's going into shock." The room erupted into activity as Sarah barked orders. Mike and Tom moved to help, following her instructions with the practiced efficiency of emergency responders. Outside, Thunder began to bellow again, the sound now taking on a frantic quality that penetrated even the thick walls of the treatment center. "We're losing her," Sarah called, administering another injection. And then, amid the chaos, came the sound of splintering wood. All heads turned toward the treatment center doors as they burst open. Thunder stood in the doorway, his massive frame blocking the light, chest heaving with exertion. The wooden paddock gate hung in splinters behind him. For a moment no one moved. The huge bull's eyes swept the room, finding Daisy's prone form on the straw. With surprising gentleness for an animal his size, Thunder stepped into the room, ignoring the humans completely. "Nobody move," Mike whispered, holding out a hand to stop Tom, who had instinctively reached for his weapon. "Let's see what he does." Thunder approached Daisy slowly, lowering his massive head to nuzzle at her neck. A soft, lowing sound emanated from his throat, almost like a purr if bulls could purr. To everyone's astonishment, Daisy's vitals on the monitor began to stabilize. "That's not scientifically possible," Sarah murmured, staring at the readings. "Some things ain't about science, Doc," Jenkins said softly, a knowing smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Some things run deeper than that." As they watched in amazement, Thunder carefully settled his massive frame onto the straw beside Daisy, his body positioned protectively around hers without putting weight on her injuries. The female bull's breathing seemed to ease almost immediately. "Well," Tom said after a long moment of stunned silence, "I guess that settles the debate about whether to keep them together." Mike nodded, a new determination settling over him. "And it settles something else, too. We've got 20 hours to find that antivenom, whatever it takes." 16 hours remained on the invisible clock hanging over Redemption Springs Wildlife Sanctuary. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of the small laboratory where Dr. Sarah Bennett hunched over a microscope, her eyes red-rimmed from strain. She had barely moved in the past 4 hours, analyzing samples of the venom extracted from Daisy's tissue. "Anything?" Mike asked from the doorway, balancing 2 cups of coffee. He'd shed his ranger jacket hours ago, his uniform shirt wrinkled and stained with sweat and Daisy's blood. Sarah straightened, pressing her palms against her lower back. "I've never seen anything like this. The venom has properties I can't identify with our equipment here." She accepted the coffee gratefully, the steam fogging her glasses momentarily. "The university lab in Austin is analyzing the samples I sent, but that could take days we don't have." Through the open door, they could hear Thunder's occasional low rumble from the treatment room. The bull had refused to leave Daisy's side, his massive form a constant sentinel beside her prone body. To everyone's surprise, his presence seemed to stabilize her condition, though Sarah was quick to attribute this to coincidence rather than any mystical bond. "State's got bee experts going through the affected areas," Mike said, leaning against the doorframe. His body language was casual, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. "They're calling it an unprecedented migration of Africanized colonies." "Migration?" Sarah scoffed, turning back to her microscope. "Bees don't just collectively decide to attack livestock across multiple properties. And they certainly don't produce venom with these characteristics." She adjusted the slide, frowning. "These protein structures are all wrong for standard Africanized bees. It's almost as if—" She trailed off, her fingers suddenly still above the microscope controls. "As if what?" Mike prompted. "As if they've been modified." Sarah swiveled in her chair, reaching for a reference book on the cluttered desk. "There are research facilities that work on venom compounds for medical applications. Anticoagulants, pain management, even cancer treatments. But this," she pointed to her notes, "this looks deliberate." Mike's expression darkened. "Jenkins and his government conspiracy theories." "Not government," Sarah corrected, flipping through the book. "Private sector. Pharmaceutical research." She found the page she was searching for and turned the book toward Mike. "A company called NeuroVita had a research facility outside Redemption Springs about 5 years ago. They were developing pain medications derived from various animal venoms before they lost their funding." Mike skimmed the article. "Says here they closed down operations." "Officially, yes." Sarah took a sip of her coffee. "But what if someone continued the research privately, off the books?" The ringing of Mike's phone interrupted them. He answered, his expression growing increasingly grim as he listened. When he hung up, his face had paled beneath his tan. "That was Tom. 2 more cattle died at the Wilson Ranch. Same symptoms as Daisy." He ran a hand through his hair. "State's talking about bringing in the National Guard to locate and destroy the bee colonies." Sarah stood abruptly. "They can't do that. Not until we understand what we're dealing with. If these are genetically modified bees, I don't think the state cares about the scientific implications right now, Sarah." Mike's voice was tired. "They care about stopping more attacks." A tentative knock on the door frame drew their attention. Emily stood there, her thin frame dwarfed by Thunder's massive silhouette in the treatment room behind her. Though the girl rarely initiated conversation, her eyes now held a determined gleam. "Miss Daisy's dying," she said simply. Sarah brushed past Mike, hurrying into the treatment room. Daisy's condition had deteriorated in the short time Sarah had been in the lab. The female bull's breathing was shallow and rapid, her massive sides heaving with each labored breath. The monitoring equipment showed dropping oxygen levels and an erratic heartbeat. Thunder stood beside her, his head lowered to rest gently against Daisy's neck. The bull's eyes, usually so placid, were filled with what Sarah could only describe as grief. He made a soft sound when Sarah approached, not threatening but questioning. "I know," Sarah whispered, surprising herself by addressing the bull directly. "I'm trying." Emily moved to Thunder's side, placing one small hand on his massive shoulder. The bull didn't flinch or move away, unusual behavior for a formerly abused animal. "He says the bees came from the old building with the broken windows." Mike and Sarah exchanged glances. It wasn't uncommon for Emily to attribute thoughts and words to the animals, part of her unique way of processing the world. "What old building, Emily?" Mike asked gently. "The one where the bad men hurt animals." Thunder remembers. Emily's hand remained on the bull's shoulder, her eyes unfocused. There were lots of small rooms with cages, and a big room with glass walls where the buzzing was. Mike straightened, something clicking into place. "The abandoned Neurovita facility. It's about 15 miles east of here, out past the old quarry." "That's just Emily's imagination," Sarah began, but stopped when she saw Mike's expression. "Thunder was rescued from a property less than 5 miles from there," he said quietly. "What if he actually did see something? What if Emily's picking up on his stress response to a real memory?" "You can't seriously believe—" "I believe we're running out of options." Mike cut her off, checking his watch. 15 hours left and standard treatments aren't working. If there's even a chance, that facility might have anti-venom or research that could help us synthesize it. Sarah looked from Mike to Daisy's struggling form, then to Thunder's watchful eyes. Science and logic had been her guiding principles throughout her career, but right now, logic wasn't offering any solutions. "I'll stay with Daisy," she conceded. "You check out the facility." "But Mike," she added as he turned to leave, "be careful. If there is something to this, whoever's responsible has already proven they don't care about collateral damage." Mike nodded grimly. "I'll take Tom with me." "No." The voice from the doorway made them all turn. Old Man Jenkins stood there, his weathered face set in determined lines. "You'll take me. I know where all the back roads are, and I know what those buildings looked like when they were still operating. My cousin worked security there before they shut down." Mike looked like he might argue, then nodded. "Grab your hat, Jenkins. We leave in 5. As Mike and Jenkins prepared to depart, Sarah noticed something odd about Thunder's behavior. The bull had shifted his position, angling his massive body to better block their view of something on Daisy's flank. Veterinary instinct taking over, Sarah moved closer. "What is it, big guy? What are you trying to show me?" Thunder didn't move away as she approached, but made a soft rumbling sound deep in his chest. Sarah carefully examined Daisy's side where Thunder had been focusing and found a cluster of stings that looked different from the others, darker, more swollen, with a distinctive pattern almost like a brand. "Mike," she called, "look at this." Mike returned to her side, Jenkins following close behind. The old man sucked in a breath when he saw the marks. "That ain't natural," Jenkins declared. "No swarm makes a pattern like that." Sarah carefully photographed the markings, then took additional tissue samples. "The venom concentration might be higher here, if I can isolate it." A sudden commotion outside interrupted her thought. Through the windows they could see several official vehicles pulling into the sanctuary driveway. White SUVs with government plates accompanied by a large truck with equipment in the back. "State response team," Mike muttered, glancing at his watch. "They're early." A tall man in a crisp suit emerged from the lead vehicle, flanked by 2 uniformed officers and a woman in a lab coat. His movements were precise, his demeanor radiating authority as he surveyed the sanctuary grounds. "Agent Marshall Reed, FDA," the man announced when Mike met him at the door. He flashed credentials briefly before returning them to his pocket. "We're investigating the outbreak of abnormal bee activity in the region. I understand you have an affected animal on the premises." Mike blocked the doorway, his stance subtly shifting to one Sarah recognized from tense encounters with poachers. "We have a Brahman bull under treatment, yes. Dr. Bennett is handling her care." Reed's eyes narrowed slightly at the obstruction. "We need to examine the animal and take samples." "This is now a federal investigation concerning potential public health risks." Behind Reed, the team began unloading equipment from the truck, including what looked distinctly like euthanasia supplies. "You have a warrant?" Mike asked, his voice deceptively calm. "We have emergency authorization under public health protocols," Reed replied smoothly. "Now please step aside, Ranger Callahan." Jenkins had slipped away during the confrontation and now reappeared at Sarah's side in the treatment room. "Government men," he whispered urgently. "They'll want to put her down. Standard protocol for unknown contagions." Sarah looked at Daisy, then at Thunder standing protectively beside her. A decision crystallized in her mind. "Help me disconnect these monitors, quickly." Jenkins didn't question her, moving with surprising agility for his age to help disconnect Daisy from the monitoring equipment. Thunder watched them intently, as if understanding the urgency of their actions. "We need to move her to the back paddock," Sarah whispered. "Through the service door. Can you get the utility cart?" Jenkins nodded and slipped out the back way. Sarah could hear Mike still arguing with Agent Reed at the front entrance, deliberately stalling. Through the window, she saw Emily quietly approaching the government vehicles, her unusual way of moving drawing the attention of the technicians. Perfect distraction, Sarah thought. Thunder surprised her again by gently nudging Daisy's side, as if encouraging her to rise. The female bull struggled, managing to lift her head slightly. "That's it, girl," Sarah encouraged. "Just a little farther." Jenkins returned with the utility cart they used for moving feed bags. It wasn't ideal, but it might support Daisy long enough to move her to the secluded back paddock where the government team wouldn't immediately find her. As they worked to position the cart, Sarah's phone chimed with an incoming message. It was from the university lab in Austin, responding to the samples she'd sent earlier. Her eyes widened as she read the preliminary analysis. "Oh my God," she breathed. "What is it?" Jenkins asked, still struggling with the cart. Sarah looked up, her face pale. "These aren't just any modified bees. According to this, the venom contains synthesized compounds nearly identical to experimental pain medications developed by Neurovita 5 years ago, medications that never received FDA approval due to severe side effects." Jenkins's weathered face creased in confusion. Why would anyone? Because underground markets for untested pharmaceuticals are incredibly lucrative, Sarah explained grimly. What if someone restarted the research privately, using bees as living factories for compounds that would be illegal to synthesize in a lab? A loud crash from the front of the building signaled that the standoff with Agent Reed had ended. Heavy footsteps approached the treatment room. "We're out of time," Sarah whispered, pocketing her phone. "We need to get Mike and head to that facility. It's our only chance of finding an antivenom specific to these compounds." As Agent Reed and his team entered the treatment room, they found Thunder standing protectively over Daisy, his massive frame blocking their approach. The bull's eyes held a challenge that required no translation. "That's one of the biggest Brahmin bulls I've ever seen," Reed remarked, keeping his distance. "You'll need to sedate him before we can examine the female." Sarah stepped forward, positioning herself beside Thunder. "This bull stays with the patient. He's keeping her stable." Reed's eyebrow arched skeptically. "Dr. Bennett, with all due respect to your expertise, we need to follow protocol here." "Your protocol might kill her," Sarah countered. "We have reason to believe this isn't a natural bee attack. The venom shows signs of modification consistent with abandoned pharmaceutical research." Something flickered across Reed's face. Surprise, quickly masked. "That's a serious allegation without evidence." "We're going to get that evidence," Mike said from the doorway, his expression hard. "At the old Neurovita facility." Reed's reaction was subtle but unmistakable, a tightening around the eyes, a slight shift in posture. "That facility has been closed for years. There's nothing there but an empty building." "Then you won't mind if we check it out," Mike challenged. For a moment, tension crackled between them. Then Reed smiled thinly. "Of course not. In fact, I'll have 2 of my agents accompany you, for safety reasons." Mike glanced at Sarah, a silent message passing between them. Whatever they found at the Neurovita facility, the government already knew about it, or worse, was involved. 16 hours, Sarah said quietly, looking at Daisy's struggling form. "That's all we have left." 12 hours remained as Mike's truck bounced along the rutted back road leading to the abandoned Neurovita facility. Beside him, Old Man Jenkins clutched the dashboard, his weathered face set in grim determination. In the back seat, one of Agent Reed's men, Agent Parker, he'd introduced himself, maintained a professional silence, his sunglasses hiding any emotion as he monitored their progress on his phone. "Turn left at the fork up ahead," Jenkins directed. "Road ain't on most maps. Company wanted privacy for their work." Mike followed the instruction, the truck lurching as they left even the pretense of a maintained road behind. Through the windshield, scrubby mesquite trees gave way to an expansive clearing where a low concrete building sprawled across the landscape. Despite the bright Texas midday sun, the facility had a shadowed, abandoned quality that raised the hair on Mike's neck. "Doesn't look like much," Agent Parker commented from the back seat, his first words since they'd left the sanctuary. "Best places to hide things never do," Jenkins replied cryptically. As Mike parked near what had once been the main entrance, he couldn't shake the feeling of familiarity that washed over him. Not with the building itself, but with the atmosphere, the particular stillness that surrounded places where bad things had happened. He'd felt it countless times in his ranger career, and before that in his less honorable pursuits. "You ever been here before?" he asked Jenkins quietly as they exited the vehicle. The old man shook his head. "Just heard stories from my cousin. Said they kept all kinds of critters here for their experiments. Snakes, spiders." He paused meaningfully. "Bees." Agent Parker spoke into his radio, confirming their arrival to whoever was monitoring their excursion. "We should wait for my colleague," he said, nodding toward the dust cloud approaching on the road behind them. "Standard protocol for entering abandoned structures." Mike exchanged a glance with Jenkins. Every minute they delayed was another minute ticking away from Daisy's chance of survival. "We'll just take a look around the perimeter," Mike said, already moving toward the building. Jenkins followed, leaving Agent Parker little choice but to accompany them or let them out of his sight. The facility's exterior was unremarkable, weathered concrete with few windows, most now broken, their frames rusted from exposure to the elements. What caught Mike's attention were the newer additions. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt, a recently cut chain on a side door, power cables running from a junction box that looked much newer than the building itself. "Place doesn't look completely abandoned to me," Mike observed, pointedly looking at Agent Parker. The agent maintained his professional demeanor. "Probably just kids or homeless people seeking shelter." "With their own power generator?" Jenkins scoffed, pointing to the humming unit partially concealed behind overgrown bushes. Before Parker could respond, the second government vehicle arrived, kicking up dust as it braked sharply beside Mike's truck. Agent Lisa Crawford emerged, her movements brisk as she adjusted her suit jacket in the Texas heat. "Find anything interesting?" she asked, her tone suggesting she expected the answer to be no. "Just getting started," Mike replied evenly. "But it seems this abandoned facility might not be so abandoned after all." Crawford's expression remained neutral. "Let's have a look inside, shall we? These old research buildings can be structurally unsound." "We should stay together." As they approached the side entrance with its freshly cut chain, Mike's mind drifted back to a different time. 1 year ago, when Thunder's journey had intersected with his own in ways he'd never anticipated. The summer rodeo in San Antonio had been Thunder's last appearance in the ring. Mike had attended undercover, following rumors of illegal animal trafficking connected to the event. He hadn't expected to recognize the massive Brahman bull being led into the arena, but even from the stands, those distinctive scars and proud bearing were unmistakable. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer had boomed, "prepare yourselves for the terror of Texas, the demon of the dirt, the unridable Thunder." The crowd had roared its approval as the chute opened. But instead of the explosive burst of energy typical of rodeo bulls, Thunder had emerged with a pronounced limp, his movements sluggish and painful. Even from a distance, Mike could see fresh injuries on the bull's flanks, evidence that Thunder's rehabilitation at the sanctuary had been undone by cruel handling. "That bull's injured!" someone in the crowd had shouted, but the rider was already in position, spurs gleaming in the arena lights. Mike had moved without thinking, vaulting over the barrier and racing toward the center of the arena. Security guards had given chase, but years of tracking poachers through rough terrain had made Mike quick and elusive. "Stop the ride!" he'd shouted, ranger badge held high. "This animal is being abused." The commotion had startled the already agitated bull. Thunder had reared, throwing the rider before the signal could even sound. As the cowboy scrambled to safety, Thunder had turned toward Mike and stopped. In that frozen moment, amid the shouting crowd and rushing security personnel, the bull and the ranger had locked eyes. Recognition had flickered in Thunder's gaze. He remembered. And what happened next became rodeo legend in 3 counties. Instead of charging Mike, Thunder had moved to stand beside him, positioning his massive body between the ranger and the approaching security guards. The bull that had been promoted as a demon stood calmly next to the man who had once shown him kindness, creating a tableau so unexpected that the entire arena had fallen silent. "That's Ranger Callahan," someone in the crowd had finally said, "from that sanctuary up in Redemption Springs." The rodeo officials had been furious, but with hundreds of witnesses and clear evidence of Thunder's injuries, they'd had little choice but to let Mike examine the bull. The subsequent investigation had revealed that Thunder had been stolen from the sanctuary 2 weeks earlier, and more importantly, that the thieves had taken a second Brahmin as well. "A younger female," the arrested handler had admitted under questioning. "Took her to a different venue. Some private collector paid top dollar." It had taken Mike 3 more months to track down Daisy, finally locating her at a makeshift rodeo on private property near the Louisiana border. By then, the young Brahmin had developed the fearful, hesitant demeanor that had so concerned them upon her return to the sanctuary. Thunder's reaction to Daisy's return had confirmed what they'd all suspected. The 2 bulls shared a bond that went beyond normal herd behavior. Watching the massive bull gently guide the traumatized female around the sanctuary, showing her safe places to drink and rest, Mike had felt a sense of wonder at the depth of connection between the animals. "Never seen anything like it," Sarah had admitted one evening as they watched the pair from the fence line. "It's almost like he's her father," Mike had finished when she trailed off. "Jenkins might be right about that," Sarah had smiled ruefully. "Don't tell him I said so, but yes." Their behavior is consistent with a parent-offspring relationship. She'd hesitated before adding, "It reminds me of how you look at Emily sometimes, you know, that same protective instinct." Mike had been startled by the observation. The quiet, autistic girl had become a fixture at the sanctuary over the past year, her special way with the animals earning her a place in their makeshift family. He hadn't realized his own feelings were so transparent. "She reminds me of someone," he'd admitted quietly. "My daughter would be about her age now." Sarah hadn't pressed for details, but her hand had found his on the fence rail, a silent acknowledgement of shared pain. They all had their reasons for finding refuge at Redemption Springs, animals and humans alike. "Callahan," Agent Crawford's sharp voice pulled Mike back to the present. "Are you coming?" Mike nodded, pushing aside the memories as he followed the agents into the dim interior of the Neurovita facility. The contrast between the bright Texas sun and the shadowed corridors momentarily blinded him, but as his eyes adjusted, details emerged that confirmed his suspicions. The facility's main hallway showed clear signs of recent use. Though dust lay thick in some areas, pathways had been worn through it by regular foot traffic. Some of the overhead lights functioned, casting pools of harsh fluorescent illumination at irregular intervals. The air held a distinctive scent, not just the mustiness of abandonment, but the sharper smell of chemical preservatives and the faint, unmistakable buzz of insects. "Hear that?" Jenkins whispered, cocking his head. "Bees." Agent Parker stepped forward. "This area isn't safe. We should turn back and wait for a proper inspection team." "We don't have time for that," Mike replied, moving deeper into the corridor. "Daisy has 12 hours at best. Your bull isn't worth risking human lives," Crawford countered, but made no move to physically stop them. And the facility's layout was utilitarian, a central corridor with laboratories and storage rooms branching off on either side. Most doors stood open, revealing empty rooms with overturned furniture and disconnected equipment. But as they progressed deeper into the building, signs of current activity became more apparent. "Look at this," Mike said, pointing to a door with a newly installed padlock. "Someone's securing certain areas." Before the agents could object, Jenkins produced a small tool from his pocket and approached the lock. "Benefits of a misspent youth," he muttered as he worked the mechanism with surprising dexterity. The lock clicked open within seconds. "That's tampering with potential evidence," Agent Parker protested weakly. "Then document it proper," Jenkins retorted, swinging the door open. The room beyond made them all fall silent. Unlike the abandoned sections of the facility, this laboratory was fully functional, clean, well-lit, and actively running experiments. Glass enclosures lined the walls, each containing small bee colonies. Monitoring equipment recorded their activity, while centrifuges and other processing machines hummed efficiently on stainless steel counters. "This isn't some makeshift operation," Mike said quietly. "This is professional-grade equipment." "And definitely not approved research," Jenkins added, pointing to a rack of vials labeled with a series of codes rather than standard pharmaceutical identifiers. Agent Crawford had gone very still, her professional demeanor cracking slightly as she surveyed the room. "We need to call this in," she said, reaching for her radio. "Wait." Mike held up a hand, his attention caught by a familiar name on a folder left open on a desk. "Calvin Wright," he read aloud, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. "You know him?" Crawford asked sharply. Mike nodded slowly. "We have history." He didn't elaborate on the nature of that history, that Calvin Wright had once been his partner in the poaching operation he'd left behind when he'd become a ranger. That Calvin knew every dirty trick Mike had ever employed because they'd developed many of them together. "He's involved in this?" Jenkins asked, his tone indicating he'd heard Mike mention the name before, though not the full context. "Looks like it." Mike skimmed the documents in the folder, research notes on venom extraction and synthesis, testing protocols, and most disturbingly, a map of local ranches with Redemption Springs Wildlife Sanctuary prominently circled. This wasn't random, he realized aloud. Daisy and Thunder were targeted specifically. "That doesn't make sense," Crawford objected. "Why target random cattle?" "Not random," Mike corrected grimly. Personal. Before he could explain further, the distinctive sound of a door opening echoed from somewhere deeper in the facility. All four froze, listening as footsteps approached down the main corridor. "Hide," Mike whispered, gesturing toward a storage closet at the back of the lab. Agent Parker looked like he might object, but Crawford nodded sharply, ushering Jenkins toward the hiding place. Mike followed, pulling the closet door nearly closed but leaving a small gap to observe the laboratory. Moments later, a man entered the room, tall, with graying hair at his temples, and the lean build of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. Though a decade had passed since they'd last met, Mike instantly recognized Calvin Wright. Calvin moved with purpose, checking readings on several of the bee enclosures before making notes on a tablet. He seemed entirely at ease in the illegal laboratory, his movements suggesting he'd performed these tasks many times before. A second person entered the lab, a younger man in a lab coat who looked nervous, his eyes darting around as if expecting trouble. "The FDA is asking questions about the bee attacks," the younger man said without preamble. "They've quarantined affected areas." Calvin didn't look up from his work. "Expected. It's a temporary setback." "Temporary?" "Calvin, they've got one of the affected bulls at that wildlife sanctuary. The vet there is good. She'll figure out these aren't normal bee stings. By then, it won't matter." Calvin finally looked up, a cold smile on his face. "The demonstration phase is complete. We've proven the delivery system works. The buyers are satisfied. But people are asking questions." "People always ask questions," Calvin cut him off. "Very few find answers." He returned to his tablet. "Besides, we have insurance. How's our special project?" The younger man shifted uncomfortably. "Ready for transport tonight?" "But I still don't understand why we need live specimens. The synthesized venom is more stable." "Our buyers have specific requirements," Calvin replied vaguely. "Pack everything up. We're moving to the secondary location in 6 hours." As the men continued their conversation, Mike felt a growing sense of dread. He glanced at Agents Crawford and Parker, noting their intense focus on the exchange. Whatever game the FDA was playing, these agents seemed genuinely surprised by what they were hearing. The closet was cramped, and Jenkins shifted slightly, causing a small sound as his boot scraped against the floor. Both men in the laboratory froze. "What was that?" the younger man asked, his voice rising in pitch. Calvin's hand moved to his waistband, withdrawing a pistol with practiced ease. "We have visitors," he said calmly. "Check the closet." Mike made a split-second decision. As the lab assistant approached their hiding place, he pushed the door open forcefully, catching the man in the face and sending him sprawling. In the same motion, Mike emerged from the closet, hands raised to show he was unarmed. "Hello, Calvin," he said evenly. "It's been a while." Recognition and then cold fury washed over Calvin's features. "Mike Callahan," he said, gun trained steadily on Mike's chest. "Should have known you'd stick your nose where it doesn't belong. Some things never change." "Some things do," Mike replied, maintaining eye contact while subtly positioning himself to block Calvin's view of the closet where the others remained hidden. "I'm a ranger now, here investigating bee attacks on livestock." Calvin's laugh held no humor. "Ranger Mike, the animal's savior. How noble. Did you tell your new friends about your old hobbies?" "About how many endangered species you tracked down for the right price." "People can change, Calvin. People pretend to change," Calvin corrected, circling slowly to maintain distance between them. "But deep down, we are what we are. You're still the same opportunist who taught me everything I know about hunting rare game." Mike kept his expression neutral, though the words stung with their partial truth. "What's this about, Calvin? Pharmaceutical research gone wrong?" "Gone right, actually." Calvin gestured toward the bee enclosures with his free hand. "Do you have any idea what these compounds are worth on the international market? Pain management alone is $1 billion industry, and we've found a way to produce targeted analgesics that bypass all the regulatory red tape." "By using killer bees as living factories," Mike said, disgust evident in his voice, "and testing your products on innocent animals." "Testing is a necessary part of research. Calvin shrugged. Those bulls at your precious sanctuary were just convenient targets, though I admit there was a certain poetry in using your little refuge for our field trial. Mike fought to keep his anger in check. You specifically targeted Thunder and Daisy. The big Brahmin? That was just a bonus. Calvin smiled coldly. When I heard you'd rescued that particular bull, I couldn't resist the symmetry. The great Mike Callahan, once the most ruthless animal tracker in Texas, now playing nursemaid to the very creatures he used to hunt. The laboratory assistant had regained his feet, blood streaming from his nose where the door had struck him. He looked between the two men with growing panic. "Calvin, we need to go, now." "In a minute," Calvin replied, his attention still fixed on Mike. "First, I need to tie up this loose end." As Calvin's finger tightened on the trigger, the closet door burst open. Agents Crawford and Parker emerged with weapons drawn while Jenkins ducked behind a lab table. "Federal agents," Crawford shouted, "drop your weapon." What followed was chaos. Calvin fired at Mike, who dove behind a counter as glass shattered above him. The agents returned fire, forcing Calvin and his assistant to retreat toward a rear exit. More shots were exchanged in the corridor beyond, the sounds echoing through the facility's concrete walls. When the gunfire ceased, Mike cautiously emerged from cover to find Jenkins unharmed but shaken. Agent Parker lay on the floor, clutching his arm where a bullet had grazed him. "Crawford went after them," Parker grimaced, accepting Mike's help to sit up. "Called for backup." "We need to find the anti-venom," Mike insisted, turning his attention to the laboratory. "There has to be something here that can help Daisy." As they searched the lab, Jenkins called out from a refrigerated storage unit in the corner. "Think I found something?" he said, holding up a rack of vials labeled Compound A7 Neutralizing Agent. "That could be it," Mike said, carefully taking the rack. "Let's grab everything that might be relevant. Research notes, formulas, samples, anything Dr. Bennett can use." As they hastily collected materials, a thought struck Mike. Calvin mentioned a special project being transported tonight. Live specimens. Parker, now on his feet, though still pale, nodded grimly. "Sounds like they're planning to move their entire operation, including the source bees." "Which means we have less time than we thought," Mike concluded. "We need to get this antivenom back to Daisy now, before Calvin decides to tie up all his loose ends." 6 hours remained when Mike's truck skidded to a halt in front of the Redemption Springs Wildlife Sanctuary. The afternoon was fading into evening, painting the Texas sky in deepening shades of orange and purple. Under different circumstances, Mike might have paused to appreciate the beauty, but now his focus was entirely on the precious cargo secured in the cooler beside him. "Hope we ain't too late," Jenkins muttered as they hurried toward the main building, the old man moving with surprising speed despite his years. The sanctuary seemed unnaturally quiet as they approached. No staff members moved between buildings. No volunteers tended to the usual evening routines. The silence raised the hair on the back of Mike's neck. "Something's wrong," he said, instinctively reaching for his sidearm. They entered cautiously, Mike leading the way with Jenkins close behind. The treatment room where they'd left Daisy stood empty. No bull, no medical equipment, not even signs of the struggle that would have ensued if they'd tried to move the massive animal against her will. "Sarah?" Mike called, his voice echoing in the vacant space. "Emily?" A soft sound from the office drew their attention. Mike approached carefully, pushing the door open to find Sarah seated at her desk. Her posture was rigid, eyes fixed on the computer screen before her. She didn't acknowledge their entrance. "Sarah," Mike said gently, "where's Daisy? Where's Thunder?" When she finally looked up, her face was pale with tension. "They took them." "Who took them?" Jenkins demanded, setting down the cooler containing the vials. "Agent Reed and his team." Sarah's voice was flat, controlled in a way that Mike recognized as barely contained fury. They came with transport equipment and a federal order. Said they needed to move the affected animal to a secure facility for public safety reasons. Mike cursed under his breath. When? About an hour ago. Sarah stood abruptly. I tried to stop them, Mike. I told them you were bringing potential antivenom, but Reed said they couldn't wait. Her professional composure cracked slightly. They sedated Thunder. It took 5 men to control him, even with the tranquilizers. And Daisy, she was too weak to resist. Mike's mind raced through the implications. This isn't about public safety. Calvin's clearing out his operation tonight and eliminating all evidence. Calvin? Sarah looked confused. What does he have to do with this? It's a long story, Mike replied, already moving toward the door. But the short version is that this whole thing was targeted, the bee attack, the unusual venom. It's all part of an illegal pharmaceutical operation. And somehow Agent Reed is involved. That doesn't make sense, Sarah objected, following him. Reed is FDA. Why would he? Corruption ain't exactly rare in government, Jenkins interjected. Question is, where'd they take the bulls? Sarah grabbed her tablet, pulling up a tracking application. I placed a GPS tag on Thunder's ear when they first brought him in. Standard procedure for rescued wildlife. She tapped the screen, frowning. Signal's weak, but it's moving. Heading east on Highway 16. Toward the Neurovita facility, Mike realized. They're taking them straight to Calvin. Sarah's eyes widened. But why? What does he want with them? Mike's expression darkened. Cleanup. If Daisy dies from the venom, it looks like a natural, if unusual, bee attack. If both bulls disappear, well, wild animals escape from sanctuaries occasionally. We gotta go after them, Jenkins insisted. I'm coming with you, Sarah stated, already gathering medical supplies. Daisy will need immediate treatment when we find them. Mike hesitated. Sarah, these people are dangerous. They've already shot at us once today. Then you'd better not waste time arguing with me, she replied with quiet determination. I'm the only one who can administer the antivenom properly. Besides, she added, checking a syringe before packing it, those are my patients. Mike recognized the steel in her voice, the same unyielding resolve he'd seen in her eyes when she'd fought to save other animals that conventional wisdom said were beyond help. He nodded once, accepting her decision. Where's Emily? He asked suddenly, realizing the girl wasn't present. Her mother picked her up early today, Sarah answered. Thank God for small mercies. As they loaded the cooler and medical supplies into Mike's truck, Agent Crawford pulled into the sanctuary driveway, her government vehicle dusty from back roads. She exited quickly, her customary professional demeanor replaced by urgent intensity. They've gone dark, she announced without preamble. Parker's in the hospital and my backup never arrived. Someone's intercepted my communications. Reed, Mike surmised grimly. Crawford nodded. We've been investigating corruption within the agency for months. Suspected someone was facilitating illegal pharmaceutical research but couldn't identify the insider. Her mouth tightened. Reed was leading the investigation, hiding in plain sight. He's taken the bulls, Sarah informed her. We're tracking them now. Crawford's hand moved to her weapon. You're not going without me. This just became a federal case of corruption, illegal experimentation, and now animal theft. Mike didn't argue, merely gestured toward his truck. Time was the enemy now, both for Daisy's survival and for their chance to catch Reed and Calvin before they disappeared with their operation. The eastern sky had darkened to deep indigo by the time they reached Highway 16, following the weak but persistent signal from Thunder's tracking device. Sarah monitored the tablet from the passenger seat, her face illuminated by its blue glow. They've stopped moving, she announced after 20 minutes of tense silence. About 2 miles ahead, just off the main road. Mike reduced their speed, headlights off as they approached the coordinates. The tracking device led them not to the Neurovita facility, as they'd expected, but to an abandoned agricultural warehouse surrounded by overgrown fields. 2 unmarked vans and a livestock trailer were parked near the main entrance, confirming they'd found their target. They must have changed locations when they realized the lab was compromised, Crawford whispered as they observed from a distance. Mike studied the building through binoculars. 2 guards at the main entrance, probably more inside. He handed the binoculars to Crawford. "Any ideas for getting past them?" The agent's expression was grim. "In a legitimate operation, I'd call for backup, but with Reed involved, I don't know who I can trust." "So, we're on our own," Mike concluded. "Not exactly," Jenkins spoke up from the back seat. "I know this place. Used to be a cotton processing facility before they built the new one closer to town. Got another entrance round back, loading dock for the trucks. Might not be guarded." Mike made a quick decision. "Sarah, you and Jenkins stay with the truck. Agent Crawford and I will try to locate Thunder and Daisy. Once we find them, we'll bring them out or signal you to come in with the anti-venom." Sarah looked like she might protest, but practicality won out. "Daisy doesn't have much time left. The anti-venom needs to be administered within the next few hours to be effective." "We'll be quick," Mike promised, checking his sidearm. He and Crawford approached the warehouse cautiously, using the overgrown fields as cover. As Jenkins had suggested, the loading dock at the rear appeared unguarded, its large doors closed but not secured with modern locks. "Ready?" Mike whispered as they positioned themselves on either side of a smaller access door. Crawford nodded, weapon ready. "Just like old times, huh, Ranger?" "Let's hope not," Mike replied grimly, thinking of his past with Calvin. "My old times aren't something I'm looking to revisit." They entered silently, finding themselves in a cavernous space filled with abandoned machinery. The air inside was stale, thick with dust except for a clear path where recent activity had disturbed the decades of neglect. Following these signs, they moved deeper into the building. Voices echoed from what appeared to be a former office area, now repurposed with hastily installed equipment. Mike and Crawford crept closer, staying within the shadows of the massive cotton processing machines. "The extraction needs to be completed tonight," Reed's voice came clearly through a partially open door. "The buyers are already nervous after the FDA started investigating the bee attacks." "It's under control," Calvin's voice replied coolly. "The venom synthesis is almost complete. Another hour, and we'll have enough compound to fulfill the initial order." "And the test subjects?" Reed asked. "The female won't survive the night. Too many stings, too much venom. Perfect for our narrative of killer bee migration. The male is more problematic, too recognizable with those distinctive markings. Disposal options? Already arranged. There's an illegal game hunting operation across the border that pays premium for exotic specimens. A Brahman bull of his size will fetch enough to cover our relocation costs." Mike felt cold fury building in his chest. They were discussing Thunder and Daisy as if they were nothing more than inventory to be processed. He caught Crawford's eye, silently communicating the need to locate the bulls before confronting Reed and Calvin. They continued their careful exploration of the warehouse, eventually discovering a makeshift holding area in what had once been a storage section. Through a chain-link partition, Mike could see Thunder lying on his side, still partially sedated from the tranquilizers. Beside him, Daisy lay motionless, her breathing shallow and labored. "They're here," Mike whispered to Crawford. "We need to get Sarah." "First, we need to secure the area," Crawford replied, surveying the surroundings. "At least 2 armed guards, and Reed and Calvin nearby. We need a distraction." Mike's ranger training kicked in as he assessed their options. The old warehouse's fire alarm system might still be functional, but triggering it would alert everyone. They needed something more targeted, something that would draw the guards away without alerting Reed and Calvin immediately. An idea formed, risky, but potentially effective. "Cover me," he whispered to Crawford. Moving silently to an abandoned control panel, Mike examined the dusty switches and levers. According to the faded labels, this section had once controlled the cotton processing conveyors, massive belts that ran throughout the warehouse. If they still had power, he flipped a switch cautiously. Nothing happened at first. Then a low mechanical groan echoed through the cavernous space as decades-old machinery reluctantly stirred to life. The sudden noise had the desired effect. The two guards exchanged confused looks before moving to investigate, leaving the holding area momentarily unguarded. "Now," Mike signaled to Crawford, and they slipped into the holding area. Thunder's eyes opened as they approached, recognition flickering in his gaze as he identified Mike. The massive bull struggled to rise despite the sedatives, his movements clumsy but determined. "Easy, big guy," Mike soothed, placing a calming hand on Thunder's shoulder. "We're getting you both out of here." Crawford moved to examine Daisy, her expression growing concerned. "She's in bad shape, Callahan. We need that antivenom now." Mike reached for his phone to signal Sarah, but before he could make the call, a cold voice froze him in place. "I always said you had a soft spot for animals, Mike, even back when you were hunting them down for cash." Calvin stood in the doorway, pistol aimed steadily at Mike's chest. Behind him, Agent Reed appeared, his own weapon trained on Crawford. "Agent Crawford," Reed said, with mocking formality. "I suspected someone in the agency was investigating me. Should have known they'd send the agency's most tenacious bloodhound." Crawford's weapon remained holstered, her hands carefully visible. "It's over, Reed. We have everything. The lab, the research notes, evidence of your corruption." Reed smiled thinly. "What you have is a trespassing charge and no backup. Your career ended the moment you decided to work outside official channels." Mike's mind raced, calculating angles and distances, looking for any advantage. Thunder had managed to rise to a standing position behind him, the bull's massive presence both a comfort and a complication in the confined space. "Why, Calvin?" Mike asked, buying time. "You were always in it for the money, but this pharmaceutical research, bee venom, targeting my sanctuary specifically, this feels personal." "Because it is personal." Calvin's expression hardened. "You remember Laredo, 2009, that Jaguar tracking job?" The memory surfaced unwillingly. A rare Jaguar sighting in South Texas, wealthy clients willing to pay top dollar for a trophy hunt, Mike and Calvin guiding them through rough terrain. What was supposed to be a simple, if illegal, hunting expedition had gone wrong when one of the clients had panicked and fired recklessly, hitting Calvin instead of the Jaguar. "You left me there," Calvin continued, voice tight with old rage, "bleeding, with a shattered leg while you disappeared with the clients. By the time I dragged myself to civilization, you'd vanished. Reinvented yourself as the righteous Ranger Mike Callahan, protector of wildlife." "I got you to the road," Mike countered, though guilt colored his words. "Sent help back." "Help that never came," Calvin spat. "I spent 3 months in a Mexican hospital, lost my guide business, accumulated medical bills I'm still paying off, all while watching your redemption story play out in the regional news." The machinery Mike had activated continued to clank and groan throughout the warehouse, providing cover for whatever Sarah and Jenkins might be doing outside. He needed to keep Calvin talking. "So this is revenge." "All this just to get back at me?" Calvin's laugh held no humor. "This is business, Mike. The revenge is just a bonus." His gaze flicked to Thunder, then back to Mike. "How fitting that your precious bull will help fund my new operation. Life has a way of coming full circle, doesn't it?" As Calvin spoke, Mike noticed Thunder's behavior changing subtly. The bull's initial grogginess from the sedatives seemed to be wearing off, his powerful muscles tensing as he focused on Calvin with unnerving intensity. Mike recognized the signs, the same pre-charge indicators he'd observed in his years of wildlife management. "Calvin," Mike said quietly, "you might want to lower that gun and back away slowly." "Still trying to negotiate?" Calvin scoffed. "That's not how this ends, Mike." "I'm not negotiating," Mike replied, taking a deliberate step sideways. "I'm warning you about him." Calvin's eyes darted momentarily to Thunder, his confidence wavering as he registered the bull's stance. That split second of distraction was all Mike needed. He lunged toward Calvin just as Thunder charged, the bull's instincts overriding any remaining effects of the sedatives. What followed was chaos. Calvin fired, the bullet grazing Mike's arm as they collided. Thunder's massive bulk narrowly missed them both, instead catching Reed with the edge of his charge. The impact sent the corrupt agent crashing into the chain-link fence with enough force to bend the metal supports. Crawford seized the opportunity, drawing her weapon and shouting commands that were lost in the commotion. More shots echoed through the warehouse as the guards responded to the disturbance. Mike grappled with Calvin on the concrete floor, years of ranger training countering Calvin's desperate strength. They rolled dangerously close to Thunder's hooves as the bull positioned himself protectively near Daisy's prone form. "It's over, Calvin," Mike managed through gritted teeth as he finally gained the upper hand, pinning his former partner's gun arm to the floor. Calvin's response was a twisted smile. "Not quite. Your bull might be up, but the female's already gone. Too late for her, just like it was too late for me in Laredo." Mike risked a glance toward Daisy, his heart sinking as he saw her unmoving form. The momentary distraction nearly cost him everything as Calvin bucked beneath him, nearly breaking his hold. "Mike!" Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. She stood in the doorway, medical kit in hand, Jenkins right behind her with the cooler of antivenom. "We heard gunshots." "Daisy," Mike called out, still struggling with Calvin. "Check Daisy." As Sarah rushed to the female bull's side, Calvin made one final desperate move, breaking free from Mike's grip and lurching toward his fallen pistol. The weapon was closer to Calvin than to Mike, the moment balanced on a knife's edge of possibility. Then Thunder moved, his massive head swinging in a deliberate arc that connected with Calvin's reaching form. The impact wasn't full force, not the lethal charge the bull was capable of, but precisely controlled, sending Calvin sprawling away from the weapon without killing him. In the sudden stillness that followed, Mike found himself meeting Thunder's gaze. The bull stood over Calvin's groaning form, not attacking further but clearly communicating that he could if needed. In that moment, Mike saw not just animal instinct but deliberate choice, protection rather than vengeance. "Remarkable," Crawford breathed, securing Reed with handcuffs. "I've never seen anything like that." "I have," Mike replied quietly, thinking of all the times he'd witnessed Thunder's protective behavior toward Daisy. "He understands more than we give him credit for." Sarah worked frantically over Daisy, administering the antivenom with practiced efficiency. "Her heartbeat is dangerously weak," she reported tensely, "but she's still with us. If this antivenom works, we might have a chance." As law enforcement sirens wailed in the distance, Crawford had managed to call legitimate backup during the confusion. Mike moved to Thunder's side, placing a gentle hand on the bull's massive shoulder. "Thank you," he said simply. Thunder's response was a soft rumble deep in his chest, his attention never leaving Daisy's still form as Sarah continued her desperate work to save the female bull's life. In that tense moment, with time still counting down and Daisy's fate hanging in the balance, Mike confronted the painful truth Calvin had hurled at him, that his past could never be truly escaped, only reckoned with. Yet somehow, in Thunder's deliberate protection rather than vengeance, he glimpsed a path forward that felt like true redemption. 2 hours remained in the invisible countdown that had governed the day's frantic events. The abandoned warehouse, so recently the site of desperate struggle, now buzzed with official activity. State police secured the perimeter, while FDA enforcement officers, legitimate ones this time, Agent Crawford assured them, cataloged evidence of the illegal pharmaceutical operation. In a cleared space near the loading dock, Sarah worked with single-minded focus on Daisy. The female Brahmin lay unnaturally still on a makeshift pallet, her massive form dwarfing the medical equipment hastily assembled around her. IV lines delivered fluids and medication to combat shock, while monitoring equipment beeped with ominous irregularity. "How is she?" Mike asked quietly, approaching after giving his preliminary statement to the authorities. Sarah didn't look up from adjusting a medication drip. "Holding on, barely. The antivenom seems to be neutralizing the toxins, but there's been significant organ damage." She brushed a strand of hair from her face, leaving a smear of antiseptic. "The next hour will tell us everything." Thunder stood nearby, refusing to be separated from Daisy despite the commotion. The massive bull had positioned himself like a sentinel, his broad head turned toward the female, occasionally making soft rumbling sounds that seemed to penetrate even Daisy's unconsciousness. Each time he vocalized, the monitors registered subtle changes in her vital signs. "He's talking to her," Emily whispered. The girl had arrived with her mother after Sarah called, insisting that Emily's presence might help keep Thunder calm during the critical treatment period. Now she sat cross-legged near the bulls, her usual silence replaced by careful observation. "What's he saying?" Mike asked, humoring the child, but finding unexpected comfort in her perspective. Emily tilted her head as if listening to something only she could hear. "He's telling her stories, about green fields and cool water, about running together." She looked up at Mike with solemn eyes. "He's telling her not to go away." Mike felt something catch in his throat. "Good advice," he managed. Old Man Jenkins approached, carrying cups of coffee from the emergency services truck. "Figured you could use this," he said, handing one to Mike and setting another beside Sarah's workstation. "Quite a day." "Quite a year," Mike corrected, gratefully accepting the steaming cup. Jenkins nodded toward the ambulance where paramedics were treating Calvin Wright's injuries before transport to custody. "Your old partner ain't looking too happy." "Ex-partner," Mike emphasized, "from another lifetime." "Past has a way of catching up," Jenkins observed, his weathered face thoughtful. "Reckon that's true for all of us." Before Mike could respond, Agent Crawford joined them, her professional demeanor firmly back in place despite the chaotic scene. "We've secured all the research materials and venom samples," she reported. "Preliminary testing confirms they were developing a synthetic pain medication using modified bee venom as a base component, highly potent, completely unregulated, and worth millions on the black market." "And Agent Reed?" Mike asked. Crawford's expression hardened. "In custody, facing multiple federal charges. We've been investigating corruption in pharmaceutical enforcement for months, but never suspected someone at his level." She glanced toward Calvin. "Your acquaintance has already started negotiating, offering names in exchange for consideration." "Sounds like Calvin," Mike said grimly. "Always looking for an angle." A sudden alarm from the monitoring equipment drew their attention. Sarah rushed to Daisy's side, her movements urgent but precise as she checked readings and adjusted medications. "Blood pressure dropping," she announced, administering another injection. "Heart rate irregular. She's crashing." Mike moved closer, helpless in the face of the medical crisis but unwilling to step away. Thunder seemed to sense the change, his massive head lowering to gently nudge Daisy's still form. The soft, lowing sound he made held such naked distress that even the hardened state troopers nearby fell silent. "Come on, Daisy," Sarah urged, her professional detachment momentarily cracking. "Stay with us." Emily approached, slipping past Mike before he could stop her. The girl placed one small hand on Daisy's foreleg and the other on Thunder's massive shoulder, creating a physical link between them. "She's scared," Emily said simply. "She doesn't know the way back." Thunder's response was immediate, a deeper, more insistent vocalization that reverberated through the loading dock. He moved closer to Daisy, positioning his body alongside hers without disrupting Sarah's medical equipment, his head resting gently against the female's neck. "Her vitals are stabilizing," Sarah reported with disbelief, watching the monitors. "I don't understand how, but she's responding." For 20 tense minutes, this tableau held, Sarah monitoring and adjusting treatment, Thunder maintaining physical contact with Daisy, Emily sitting quietly nearby, her presence somehow integral to the fragile balance they'd achieved. Gradually, Daisy's readings strengthened, moving from critical to serious but stable. "I think we're past the worst," Sarah finally announced, the tension in her shoulders visibly easing. "The anti-venom is working, her organ function is improving." Mike released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "She's going to make it?" "Barring complications, yes." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "She's not out of the woods yet, but Brahmin cattle are remarkably resilient. With proper care and time to heal." The unspoken question hung in the air. Where would that care take place? The sanctuary had been compromised, their operations disrupted by the day's events. Before Mike could voice these concerns, a commotion near the warehouse entrance caught their attention. A tall, distinguished man in a tailored suit made his way through the police cordon, credentials clearing his path. Agent Crawford straightened, clearly recognizing a superior. "Director Harmon," she greeted him. "I wasn't expecting you on site." A corrupt senior agent, an illegal pharmaceutical operation, and a wildlife trafficking connection? The director raised an eyebrow. This case hit the trifecta of interagency jurisdiction. "I wanted to see it firsthand." His gaze swept over the scene, lingering on the bulls and the makeshift medical setup. "These are the affected animals?" "Yes, sir," Crawford confirmed. "The female was directly targeted with the modified bee venom. The male was collateral damage." "Not collateral," Mike corrected, stepping forward. "Thunder was specifically chosen because of his connection to me. This whole operation had a personal vendetta component." Director Harmon studied Mike with sharp intelligence. "Ranger Callahan, your reputation precedes you." There was something in his tone that made Mike wonder exactly which reputation the director was referring to, his ranger work or his previous life. "The bulls need specialized care," Sarah interjected, her focus entirely on her patient's welfare. "We need to transport them back to our sanctuary as soon as Daisy is stable enough to move." "That may be complicated," Harmon replied. "This case involves multiple federal violations. The animals may be considered evidence." Thunder shifted at these words, as if understanding the implication. His massive head rose, dark eyes fixing on the director with unmistakable wariness. "Evidence?" Mike challenged, protective instinct rising. "They're living creatures who've been through hell today. Daisy nearly died. They need proper care, not an evidence locker." Harmon's expression remained neutral. "I understand your concern, Ranger, but protocol in cases involving potentially modified organisms—" "They're not modified," Sarah interrupted firmly. "They're victims. The bees were modified, not the bulls. And Daisy has already received the antivenom. There's nothing to be gained scientifically by taking them into federal custody." The director seemed about to argue further when Emily spoke, her quiet voice somehow cutting through the tension. "They belong together," she said simply. "Thunder is Daisy's father." All eyes turned to the girl, then back to the bulls. Thunder had positioned himself protectively beside Daisy, his posture communicating clear intention. Where she went, he would follow. "Her father?" Harmon echoed skeptically. "It's a theory we've had," Sarah explained. "Their behavior has always suggested a familial bond rather than a mate relationship. We haven't confirmed it with DNA testing, but actually, we have, came a new voice. A young technician approached, tablet in hand. Dr. Bennett, the lab results you requested last month just came through. He handed her the tablet, looking slightly embarrassed. Sorry for the delay. Budget cuts meant non-urgent tests got backlogged. Sarah scanned the report, her eyes widening. It's confirmed. Thunder is Daisy's biological father. We ran the comparison against samples we took during their initial health assessments. She looked up at Director Harmon. These aren't just random animals. They're family. Something shifted in Harmon's expression, a softening around the eyes, a subtle realignment of authority and compassion. I see. Sir, Crawford added quietly, given the circumstances, allowing the animals to return to the sanctuary with proper monitoring protocols might be the most pragmatic solution. We've already secured all the physical evidence we need for prosecution. The director was silent for a moment, his gaze moving between the bulls, the medical equipment, and the determined faces surrounding him. Finally, he nodded. Very well. The animals can return to the sanctuary under supervision. We'll need regular reports on their condition, and they can't be relocated without authorization until the case is closed. Relief washed through Mike. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Ranger Callahan, Harmon replied evenly. There's still the matter of your history with Calvin Wright. Agent Crawford's report mentions some concerning statements he made about your past activities. Mike felt the weight of every eye upon him, Sarah's, Jenkins', even Emily's. The moment he'd been dreading for years had finally arrived. His past and present were colliding, with no place left to hide. It's true, he said quietly. Before I became a ranger, I worked with Calvin. We tracked and captured exotic animals for wealthy clients. Some of it was legal guide work, but much of it wasn't. The admission felt both terrible and oddly freeing. I'm not proud of who I was then. Mike, Sarah began, her expression a complex mixture of shock and something else he couldn't quite identify. It's okay, he told her. It's time everyone knew. I left that life behind when I realized what we were really doing, the harm we were causing. Became a ranger to try to make amends. He turned back to Harmon. Whatever consequences come from this, I'll face them. But please don't punish the sanctuary or these animals for my past. Director Harmon studied him for a long moment. Calvin Wright has implicated you in multiple wildlife trafficking operations between 2007 and 2011. Under normal circumstances, that would trigger an immediate investigation, regardless of the statute of limitations. Mike nodded, accepting the inevitable. However, Harmon continued, these are hardly normal circumstances. Your actions today, and by all accounts your work these past 10 years, suggest a man who has genuinely changed course. He glanced toward Agent Crawford, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. The Department of Justice has discretion in such matters, particularly when weighed against current public service. Hope flickered cautiously in Mike's chest. What are you saying, sir? I'm saying that redemption is a powerful concept, Ranger Callahan, one our justice system sometimes recognizes. Harmon straightened his already immaculate suit. Consider this a provisional second chance. Agent Crawford will take your full statement regarding your past activities, for intelligence purposes only, not prosecution. In return, you'll continue your work at the sanctuary, which will include caring for these animals and providing regular updates to our investigation team. The relief nearly buckled Mike's knees. Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say. Say you'll do better with this second chance than Calvin did with his, Harmon replied simply, before turning to depart. As the director walked away, the emotional weight of the day, the desperate race against time, the confrontation with his past, the near loss of Daisy, and now this unexpected reprieve, crashed over Mike like a wave. He found himself sitting heavily on an overturned crate, hands slightly trembling. Sarah approached cautiously, her expression unreadable. "Were you ever going to tell me?" she asked quietly. "I wanted to," Mike admitted. "So many times. But I was afraid of losing the sanctuary, of losing—" He stopped, unable to voice what mattered most. "Of losing us," Sarah finished for him. "The family we've built there." Mike nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "Look at me," she insisted gently. When he finally did, she continued, "10 years ago, I lost my son in an accident. I was the doctor on call who couldn't save him. For years, I defined myself by that failure, the mother who couldn't protect her child, the doctor who wasn't good enough when it mattered most. Sarah, that wasn't your fault. Neither was yours," she interrupted. "We all have pasts, Mike. What matters is what we choose to do with our second chances." She nodded toward Thunder and Daisy. "They taught me that. Maybe they can teach you too." As if understanding he was being discussed, Thunder raised his massive head, dark eyes meeting Mike's with that same uncanny intelligence he'd displayed from their first meeting. In that gaze, Mike saw neither judgment nor absolution, only the simple acceptance of what was and what could be. Emily approached, slipping her small hand into Mike's calloused one. "Thunder says everyone deserves a second chance," she said with the certainty only children possess. "Even bulls, even people." "When did you get so wise, little one?" Jenkins chuckled, joining them. Emily shrugged. "Animals know things. They just need someone to listen." The monitors tracking Daisy's condition beeped with steadier rhythm now, each sound a reassurance that the invisible countdown had been defeated. The female bull's eyes had opened briefly, recognition flickering as she registered Thunder's presence beside her. "We should prepare for transport," Sarah said, her professional focus returning. "Daisy's stable enough to move and she'll recover better in familiar surroundings." As they made preparations, Agent Crawford approached Mike one last time. "We found something in Calvin's personal effects you should see," she said, handing him a worn photograph. The image showed a much younger Calvin and Mike standing proudly beside a captured jaguar, the very one from the Laredo incident that had set all this in motion. But what caught Mike's attention was the second photo behind it, one he'd never seen before. It showed Calvin in a hospital bed, his leg heavily bandaged, reading a newspaper with Mike's face on the front page, his Ranger Academy graduation. "He kept track of your entire career," Crawford explained quietly. "Every article, every commendation. His obsession with you went beyond the injury or the money. I think what he couldn't forgive was that you found redemption while he chose a different path." Mike stared at the photos, understanding finally dawning. He could have changed too, made different choices. "Some people don't want redemption," Crawford replied. "They want justification for staying exactly who they are." She nodded toward Thunder, who remained vigilantly beside Daisy. "Your bull made his choice clear today. When he had every reason for vengeance, he chose protection instead." As the transport vehicles were finally prepared and Daisy was carefully loaded for the journey home, Mike found himself walking alongside Thunder, the massive bull seemingly understanding they were heading back to safety. The setting sun cast long shadows across the warehouse yard, painting everything in gentle gold that belied the day's violence and fear. "You know," Jenkins remarked, falling into step beside him, "my granddaddy used to say that the good Lord speaks through his creatures when people are too stubborn to listen." The old man nodded toward Thunder. "Reckon today he was speaking pretty clear." Mike couldn't disagree. In Thunder's protection of Daisy, in his restraint with Calvin, in his unwavering loyalty despite all human betrayal, there were lessons that transcended species. Lessons about forgiveness, about family, about the capacity for change. As they finally departed the warehouse, leaving behind the evidence of human cruelty and corruption, DNA test results from the lab tech's tablet weighed on Mike's mind. Thunder and Daisy, father and daughter, reunited against impossible odds. Their bond wasn't romantic as they'd first thought, but something even more fundamental, the unbreakable connection between parent and child. The revelation struck him with unexpected force as Emily's small hand slipped into his again, her quiet presence beside him feeling suddenly, profoundly significant. Perhaps there were second chances, not just for past mistakes, but for futures not yet built, for family bonds that could still be formed, even after years of separation and loss. With that thought warming his heart, Mike climbed into the transport vehicle beside Thunder and Daisy, heading home to the sanctuary that had saved them all. The Texas sun painted golden stripes across the sanctuary's main paddock as Mike adjusted the shade cloth over Daisy's resting area. 3 weeks had passed since the harrowing day of bee attacks, pharmaceutical conspiracies, and last-minute rescues. 3 weeks of healing, both for the bulls and for the humans who cared for them. The female Brahmin was recovering steadily, though the angry welts from the bee stings had left pale scars across her silver-white hide. "How's our girl doing today?" Sarah asked, approaching with a clipboard in hand and her stethoscope around her neck. The morning rounds had become their ritual, a quiet moment shared before the day's full demands began. "Stronger," Mike replied, stepping back to let Sarah examine her patient. "She finished all her feed this morning, even took a walk around the paddock with Thunder before the heat set in." Sarah nodded approvingly as she listened to Daisy's heart and lungs. "Remarkable improvement." "Her cardiac rhythm is completely normal now." She straightened, making notes on her clipboard. "The anti-venom did its job. I'd say she's officially out of danger." Thunder watched their interaction from a respectful distance, his massive form casting a long shadow in the morning light. Since their return to the sanctuary, the bull's protective behavior toward Daisy had evolved. No longer hovering constantly, but maintaining a watchful presence that allowed his daughter space to recover her independence. The confirmation of their familial relationship had recontextualized 3 years of observed behavior, turning what they'd once interpreted as unusual mate bonding into something even more profound: a father's enduring devotion to his child. "You know," Sarah said thoughtfully, "in all my years of veterinary practice, I've never seen a bull so attuned to his offspring. That level of recognition and protective instinct usually fades once calves mature." "Thunder's not exactly your average bull," Mike observed with a smile. "Neither is Daisy." "Neither are any of us," came Old Man Jenkins' voice as he approached, carrying a bucket of fresh water. Emily walked beside him, her steps synchronized with his slower pace. "After what we've all been through together, reckon we're family now, blood or not." The word family lingered in the air, carrying weight and possibility. Mike watched as Emily slipped under the fence rails with the easy confidence of a child who knew she was welcome. The girl approached Daisy without hesitation, running her small hand along the bull's broad flank in greeting. Thunder moved closer, lowering his massive head to allow Emily to scratch behind his ears, a gesture of trust that still amazed Mike, given the bull's history of abuse. "Director Harmon called this morning," Sarah mentioned, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "The investigation is officially closing. All charges against Reed and Calvin have been filed, with additional arrests in 3 states connected to the pharmaceutical operation." Mike nodded, relief washing through him. "And our status here? The sanctuary's cleared of any involvement. We're free to operate normally again." Sarah hesitated before adding, "He also mentioned that your cooperation has been exemplary. Your past is officially considered closed." The weight that had sat on Mike's shoulders for weeks, for years really, lightened perceptibly. "Second chances don't come along often," he said quietly. "No," Sarah agreed, her eyes meeting his. "But third and fourth chances are even rarer." Some of us are fortunate enough to recognize them when they appear." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a small convoy of vehicles coming up the sanctuary's long driveway. Sheriff Tom Denton's police cruiser led the procession, followed by several cars Mike didn't recognize and a school bus painted with cheerful colors. "Were we expecting visitors?" Mike asked, puzzled. Sarah's smile held a secret. "Maybe. Emily, would you like to show Ranger Mike what we've been planning?" The girl nodded eagerly, grabbing Mike's hand and pulling him toward the arriving vehicles. As they approached, Mike saw the bus doors open, releasing a stream of children ranging from elementary to high school age. Many used wheelchairs or walkers, while others moved with the distinctive gaits of various physical challenges. "The Redemption Springs Special Education Program," Sheriff Denton explained as he joined them. "Sarah's been working with the school board to establish an animal therapy program here at the sanctuary." Mike looked to Sarah in surprise. She shrugged, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. After seeing Emily's connection with Thunder and Daisy, it seemed obvious. Animals don't judge difference the way humans do. They respond to kindness, patience, intention. As if to prove her point, Thunder approached the fence line nearest the children, his usually intimidating presence somehow softened. The massive bull stood calmly as the children's teachers guided them closer, explaining how to offer their hands for the bull to sniff. "Is it safe?" Mike asked quietly, instinctive caution kicking in despite his trust in Thunder. "Safer than keeping him isolated," Sarah replied. "The more positive human interactions he has, the more his old trauma heals. Besides," she added with a smile, "Emily's been working with him for weeks. He knows exactly how to behave with the children." Indeed, Thunder's demeanor was remarkable, gentle curiosity replacing the wariness that had characterized his early days at the sanctuary. Even more surprising was Daisy, who had risen from her resting place to join her father at the fence, her recovery apparently accelerated by the excitement of new visitors. "Will you look at that?" Jenkins murmured, standing beside Mike. "Two of the most powerful creatures on this ranch, treating those kids gentler than a mother with newborn lambs." Among the visitors, Mike noticed a woman watching the scene with particular intensity. Unlike the other adults, who focused primarily on the children's safety and engagement, her attention remained fixed on Thunder and Daisy with professional interest. "Dr. Elena Vasquez," Sarah explained, following Mike's gaze. "She's from the University of Texas Research Department, Animal Cognition and Behavior. I invited her to observe Thunder and Daisy's interaction. She's interested in studying their bond for a paper on bovine familial recognition." "Going to make our bulls famous, huh?" Mike smiled. "They already are, in a way." "Agent Crawford called yesterday. The full story is going public next week. Illegal pharmaceutical research, corrupt FDA agent, wildlife trafficking connection, and," Sarah added with a meaningful look, "the remarkable story of a Brahmin bull who helped save his daughter and bring down the operation." Mike watched as Emily guided a boy in a wheelchair closer to Thunder. The bull lowered his massive head with extraordinary gentleness, allowing the child to touch his broad forehead. The boy's face transformed with delight, his physical challenges momentarily forgotten in the wonder of connection with such a powerful creature. "Life's full of circles, ain't it?" Jenkins observed. "Those bulls got rescued, then they helped rescue each other, and now they're helping rescue these kids in their own way." "Speaking of circles," Sarah said, her tone shifting to something more personal, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you, Mike." Before she could continue, Agent Crawford's government vehicle appeared on the sanctuary driveway. The agent emerged looking more relaxed than Mike had ever seen her, dressed in casual clothes rather than her usual suit. "Sorry I'm late," she called, approaching their group. "Paperwork never ends, even when the case is closed." "You're just in time," Sarah assured her. "We're about to make the official announcement." "Announcement?" Mike looked between them, confusion evident. Sarah took a deep breath. The board of directors met yesterday. With the sanctuary's profile rising after everything that happened, we've received some substantial donation offers, including a grant from the University of Texas for our new therapy program. That's fantastic, Mike said, genuinely pleased but still confused by the formality. It is, Sarah agreed, but it means changes, expansion, more animals, more staff, more responsibility. She straightened, her expression turning serious. The board has created a new position, Sanctuary Director. They've asked me to fill it. Sarah, that's wonderful, Mike said warmly. No one deserves it more. Thank you, but that means my current position, head veterinarian and operations manager, will be vacant. Her eyes met his directly. The board would like to offer it to you, Mike. Officially joining the sanctuary leadership, not just as our ranger liaison. The offer struck Mike speechless. After weeks of uncertainty following his past's exposure, after years of keeping people at a professional distance to protect his secrets, he was being offered not just acceptance but trust, a place, a purpose beyond redemption. I don't know what to say, he managed finally. Say yes, you fool, Jenkins interjected with affectionate gruffness. Where else you gonna find bulls that know you better than you know yourself? A commotion from the paddock drew their attention. Thunder had moved to position himself directly behind Daisy, who seemed suddenly unsteady on her feet. For a heartbeat, Mike feared a relapse in her condition, but then he understood. Sarah, he called urgently. Look at Daisy's stance. Sarah's veterinary instincts kicked in immediately. She assessed the female bull with a professional eye, then broke into a broad smile. She's not sick, she's pregnant. Pregnant? Mike echoed in disbelief. But how? When? Must have happened before they were stolen from the sanctuary last year, Sarah theorized, quickly calculating dates. Gestation for Brahman cattle is around 285 days. She'd be in her final weeks now. Thunder's behavior suddenly made perfect sense. The protective positioning, the renewed vigilance. The bull wasn't just guarding his daughter, he was preparing to welcome a grand calf. Life finds a way, Agent Crawford observed quietly. Even through all this chaos and pain, something new was growing. The metaphor wasn't lost on Mike. As he watched Thunder's gentle guidance of Daisy toward a more comfortable area of the paddock, as he observed the children's faces light up at the prospect of a calf being born at the sanctuary, as he felt Emily's small hand slip trustingly into his, the decision crystallized in his heart. Yes, he said simply, turning back to Sarah. I accept the position. Her smile was worth every hardship that had led to this moment. I was hoping you would. The sanctuary had begun as Mike's attempt at redemption, a way to balance the scales for his past actions. Somewhere along the way, it had become much more. A home, a mission, and now, with Sarah's steady presence beside him and Emily's quiet acceptance, the possibility of a family he'd long ago stopped believing he deserved. The afternoon unfolded with a sense of celebration. The children from the special education program were introduced to other sanctuary residents, retired horses, rehabilitated deer, even a one-winged hawk that perched calmly for their wonder-filled observation. Through it all, Thunder maintained his dignified watch over Daisy, his presence a constant reminder of the unexpected bonds that had brought them all together. As the day drew to a close and the visitors departed, Mike found himself alone with Thunder and Daisy in the quiet paddock. The setting sun bathed everything in warm light, softening edges and creating a moment of perfect peace after weeks of turmoil. You two have taught me more than I ever expected, Mike told the bulls softly, about loyalty, about protection, about second chances. Thunder regarded him with those intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight through to Mike's core. The bull made a soft rumbling sound deep in his chest. neither a bellow nor a moo, but something uniquely his own, a communication that needed no translation. "I know," Mike agreed, as if they were having a proper conversation. "Family isn't always what we expect it to be." From the main building, he could see Sarah and Emily approaching across the sanctuary grounds, their silhouettes outlined against the sunset. Jenkins followed at his own pace, his weathered face turned toward the evening sky as if in wordless gratitude for how everything had unfolded. "Mike," Sarah called as they neared. "Daisy's going to need constant monitoring tonight. I think she might deliver sooner than we expected." "I'll stay with them," Mike offered immediately. "We'll all stay," Emily said with quiet certainty, her rare full sentence carrying the weight of decision. As they settled in for the night's vigil, arranging chairs near Daisy's stall and bringing thermoses of coffee and hot chocolate, Mike felt the final pieces of his life shifting into place. The sanctuary had always been a place of healing for the animals they rescued. Now he understood it had been healing him too, all along. Thunder maintained his vigilant presence as darkness fell, occasionally nudging Daisy with gentle encouragement as her labor progressed. The bull's patience and tenderness continued to defy conventional understanding of bovine behavior, yet seemed perfectly natural to those who had come to know him. Shortly after midnight, under a canopy of Texas stars, Daisy delivered a healthy female calf, silver-white like her mother, with distinctive markings around her eyes that echoed Thunder's own. The birth was remarkably smooth, as if Daisy had drawn strength from the circle of care surrounding her. "Well, I'll be," Jenkins murmured, as the newborn calf struggled to stand on wobbly legs. "3 generations together. That's a rare blessing." Thunder approached his grand calf with extraordinary gentleness, lowering his massive head to inspect the newest member of their unlikely family. The calf showed no fear, instinctively recognizing the protection offered by this towering presence. "She needs a name," Sarah said softly, her shoulder brushing against Mike's as they watched the scene unfold. "Hope," Emily suggested, her voice clear in the night stillness. "Because she was growing all along, even when we couldn't see her." Mike felt the word resonate deep within him. Hope. The thing that had sustained Thunder through abuse and captivity, the force that had driven Daisy to survive the bee venom against all odds, the quiet current that had guided Mike himself from his darkest past toward this moment of belonging. "Hope it is," he agreed, his hand finding Sarah's in the darkness. As dawn broke over Redemption Springs Sanctuary, news of the calf's birth spread quickly through the local community. Visitors began arriving to glimpse the miracle that had emerged from near tragedy. Ranchers who had initially been skeptical of the sanctuary's work, families bringing wide-eyed children, even Director Harmon making an unofficial appearance just to see how things turned out. Thunder's behavior continued to fascinate everyone who observed the unusual family group. The massive bull maintained a protective perimeter around Daisy and Hope, but with a discernment that allowed trusted humans to approach while warning away those who moved too quickly or loudly. "Never seen anything like it," a visiting rancher admitted to Mike. "That bull understands things most humans don't." "He's had good teachers," Mike replied, watching as Emily sat cross-legged near the family group, her quiet presence accepted without question. And so have we. As summer deepened into autumn, the sanctuary transformed in ways both visible and invisible. New paddocks were constructed for the expanding therapy program. University researchers came and went, documenting Thunder and Daisy's remarkable bond. The story of the bee attack and subsequent investigation faded from headlines, but the impact remained in strengthened wildlife protection laws, in new pharmaceutical regulations, in the sanctuary's growing reputation as a place of healing. Through it all, Mike found himself changed in ways he'd never anticipated. The man who had once kept everyone at a distance now led community programs, welcomed school groups, and most significantly, began the process of becoming Emily's foster father, a journey supported wholeheartedly by Sarah, whose own place in their evolving family grew more defined with each passing day. "You know," Old Man Jenkins remarked one evening as they watched Thunder guiding Hope through her first exploration of the larger paddock, "my daddy used to say that the good Lord doesn't always give us what we want, but he sure does give us what we need." Mike nodded, understanding the wisdom in those words. He hadn't wanted his past exposed, hadn't planned on facing Calvin again, certainly hadn't anticipated becoming part of a makeshift family that included bulls and scientists and a quiet girl who spoke more eloquently with animals than with people. Yet here they all were, bound together by threads of circumstance and choice, of crisis and healing, of second chances recognized and embraced. "The good Lord made creatures with more heart than most men I've known," Jenkins continued, his weathered face peaceful in the setting sun, "and twice the forgiveness." As if hearing and understanding these words, Thunder raised his massive head, dark eyes meeting Mike's across the paddock. In that silent exchange lay everything that needed saying: acknowledgment of how far they'd both come from their first meeting, appreciation for the unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment, and most of all, recognition of the simple truth that had saved them all. Sometimes, Mike reflected, as the Texas twilight settled around them, the greatest heroes weren't the ones who roared the loudest or fought the hardest. Sometimes they were the ones who stood guard in silence, who protected without reservation, who demonstrated with every action what it meant to love without condition or expectation. Thunder turned back to his daughter and granddaughter, his powerful presence a living testament to that quiet heroism, a reminder that even in a world that could be cruel and dangerous, there remained the possibility of loyalty, of courage, and of a love that needed no words to be understood. Dear friends, I hope Thunder and Daisy's story touched your heart today. In their remarkable journey, perhaps you recognized something of your own life, the unexpected second chances, the family bonds that transcend conventional boundaries, and the healing power of unconditional love. Like Thunder standing guard over Daisy and little Hope, many of us have weathered storms to protect those we cherish. Through life's challenges, whether health scares, career changes, or family transitions, it's the steadfast connections that sustain us. Remember, it's never too late for new beginnings. Just as Thunder found purpose beyond his painful past, we too can embrace fresh chapters in our golden years. Whether through mentoring younger generations, building new relationships, or rediscovering forgotten passions, life continues to offer precious moments of joy and purpose. Has there been a Thunder in your life, someone whose quiet strength or loyalty helped you through difficult times? Or perhaps you've been that guardian presence for someone else. Share your story of unexpected connections or second chances in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what another person needs to hear today.